This again, everyone. We regret to inform you, Mr.
We're back
President,
again.
that a second homebrew video has hit YouTube. So last time out, right, we talked about homebrewing Ironsworn, didn't we? And we talked about some ideas that we had, some notions that we had that would be in some way interesting or good. And, you know, we put them out there into the ether. And you know what? Some people said, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. I like this. I'll adopt it into my game without thinking about it too much. And some people, and I'm not going to say that we did it, and like, especially from my point of view, it wouldn't be like me at all to say something that sounds smart on the surface. But ultimately, under even the slightest scrutiny, like collapses, you know, like a souffle, just falls apart. And, you know, there are some very, very clued up people in the Ironsworn Discord who said, hey, yeah, this is a good idea on paper, but have you thought about all of these consequences?
To which we answer, no, of course
why
not.
would I think about it?
Who do you think we are?
Yeah, who are you talking to? Like, you know, and yeah, like when I said, look, first of all, like recover moves, they're out, they're done. And then someone pointed out in the Discord, you haven't really considered how that affects everything. And I was like, well, of course I didn't consider it. I just thought it sounded good. But what I'm getting around to saying the long way is that we did have some ideas that I still do think are good. And this episode is our attempt to dig a little deeper into them. Because what we've done is we've picked 3 of the ideas that we think were the best ideas, and we've just sort of fleshed them out a little bit. That's kind of what we've done, isn't it?
We threw spaghetti at the wall, to see what sticks.
And there's just a big starchy stain on the wall.
Yeah.
There's not a lot there. I didn't have to put the sauce on first before I threw it. That was a mistake. It's ruined the paintwork. So we have decided to put together this little document called Matt and Steve's Excellent Ironsworn Homebrew, subtitle Iron Brew. I hope you all appreciate the professional font. Graphic design is my passion. And what we've done is, like I said, we've picked 3 of the ideas, and we're going to try and maybe dig into them in a little more detail. Now, the ideas that we thought were good enough and robust enough to withstand more work are as follows. And the first one, which was a very popular one, which was unstat locking the moves, or removing the stat lock from moves. Now, I said, you just got to be free with it, man. You got to be able to do any move you want with any stat. And again, someone pointed out the obvious flaws in that plan. And we had to think about it, didn't we, Steve? But what had occurred to us is a good idea, but it shouldn't apply to all the moves, but it should definitely apply to all the adventure moves. So
that's right.
What I did here is I have slightly rewritten the adventure moves. And when I say slightly rewritten, what I mean is they now say roll plus the appropriate stat rather than roll with X, Y, and Z. And I did this and I sent it to Steve. And I said, Steve, have you noticed a crucial difference in this and the adventure moves as presented in the Ironsworn book? And Steve, what did you say?
I don't remember.
You said no, Matt. I had not mentioned. No. I have not noticed the difference in the adventure moves as you would put them. So check your gear is still in there. You have to do that against supply. But what Steve didn't notice, and what some of you other people may not have noticed, is that Aid Your Ally is now no longer a move. Because it only applies to secure an advantage or gain ground. So why not make the effects of it subtext of secure an advantage and gain ground? So I've put the text from Aid Your Ally, a move that have you ever made it in a game of Star Forge? I made it once.
I will have you know, I aid my ally quite often.
Do you actually?
I do indeed.
This is an Aid Your Ally house, is it?
This is an Aid Your Ally house. No, I mean, I feel like in my Legend of the Sundered Isles campaign that I've been doing, I have been using aid your ally as a way to kind of help set up my guest to hopefully succeed on what they're doing. But, and I think this is probably what you were driving at, I don't know that I've ever I don't know that I've ever actually used the words "I'm going to do aid your ally."
Yeah.
I just say I'm going to secure an advantage for you,
Yeah.
and then I roll.
And
then I just say I'm giving you the benefits of secure an advantage.
yeah. So 2 points here. Firstly, you're right. Like, it doesn't need to be a separate move.
Mhm.
Secondly, you never aided me in our game, Steve.
Well, I didn't feel like you needed any help or setup because you're just an A+ player.
That's a great save, Steve. Great save. But yeah, these moves, I will make a PDF of this and I'll stick it in the episode description if anyone wants to download it. It's really not that different to the moves as written, but if you did want to try playing the adventure moves with the stat lock removed, and you didn't want to have to kind of like envision how it sounds every time you read it, then you can fill your boots. I think this is a very simple change. I'm not going to do it on my channel because my channel is about showcasing the game rules as written. But if I play this,
is it?
Well, hang on, right? Okay, hang on. Look, Steve, I have a responsibility. If a new player stumbles across my channel, to try and be as accurate as I can with the rules. And if I do break the rules or get a rule wrong, I say it.
Yeah.
But I don't want people to come.
It's not rules. It's not rules as written. It's rules as you read them.
Yeah. Rules as you read them. Of course. That's how I play. I mean, I don't want to say rules as intended. It's not. Yeah. It's the vibe of the rules, right?
Sure.
But yeah, like if I took a different stat array, which I famously did, I explain why, and I explain that's the thinking behind it, rather than I don't want people thinking that this is. Well, I don't want them to see the game and then read the book and be like, "Hey, it's different." I mean, people still did that, even though I did say I was doing that. But yeah,
that's just being on the internet, Matt.
Yeah. That was my first mistake, being on the internet.
Yep.
So I think these adventure moves work very well. They have been tested, not at all, but I'm sure that they are absolutely fine. Like, I cannot see any flaw in this this faultless design logic that we've got. That's one thing that I've learned from this whole affair, Steve. Game design's hard, right?
You know what? It really is. Staring at that blank page and being like, how do I copy and paste someone else's hard work and then just change 3 words?
Yeah. So this is it, right? The 2 things, right? 1, game design's hard. 2, isn't Ironsworn a really well-designed game?
It's great. This
isn't changing it like maybe folly.
I mean, I think it has a place because, maybe we're on our way to designing something else.
Could you imagine?
I tried, and then
I just went
off the rails.
I just like to tell everyone before we move on to the next slide. The next slide is not a game that me and Steve have written, sadly. Although I alluded to Steve before we were recording, I do have an idea for an Ironsworn hack-ish, kind of. But at this stage, that's all it is. And when you see the next few slides, you might think, I don't want to play that at all. So yeah, have you got anything more to say about my stat lock removal, other than the fact that it's flawless?
It is in fact flawless. No, I think it's a really good idea to pull back from just free love, stats anywhere, to the adventure moves, the adventure moves, because I think the adventure moves are meant to be the most broad moves in the game, and so they are the kind of catch-all for if you don't have a more specific move that gets triggered, but you still need to roll because something has to happen here. The adventure moves are the ones that you are going to lean on. So I think having the example like we talked about last time of being able to beat the information out of someone using iron,
Mm,
like that just makes sense, because if the narrative takes you in that direction, then the stat that you're rolling should reflect that.
yeah. Yep, I agree. So you've been forewarned, everyone. This becomes way less good as we go through this. But again, these are all work in progress ideas. These are just I don't want to say fine tuning. We're tinkering
Mm-hmm.
with the ideas that we brought up in the last episode. So next
Honestly,
up, go on.
we're doing a service by essentially game designing live
Yeah.
for our audience.
Yeah, I did think about doing this as a live stream, but then I was like, Jesus Christ, we'd be
Oh, that would have been
be pilloried.
whew.
Yeah, it's been hard work. Be
Yeah.
getting Sean cease and desisting us.
Yeah.
So next up, and this is something that I'm really interested in, and as you'll see from the work that so me and Steve have both worked on this separately, and also pitched in with each other's ideas, doing some parallel design. But this was kind of my take on the legacy track, because I talked in the first video about how I wouldn't mind seeing the legacy track being combined, as opposed to 3 separate tracks being one track that had a lot more triggers and would have some sort of narrative. Now, I don't expect you to read off the screen here. I do appreciate that most of you are just kind of listening to this. But what I've come up with is, like I say, a single track called Legacy. And the wording of all this stuff is a little bit kind of cumbersome, but it's something that could be very much have the rough edges smoothed off. So it says, when you finish an expedition, fulfill a vow, forge a bond, or take decisive action, mark your legacy track as appropriate. And what I've done is instead of having the whole thing of like on a weak hit, you mark one lower, I've just decided that you only get to mark your legacy track on ranks dangerous and above. Firstly, because it divides equally into 4. So 1 tick for dangerous, 2 for formidable, 3 for extreme, and 4 for epic. So the reason I've done that is, as I was explaining to Steve, is that sometimes in your character's story, defeating some bandits in a fight is important because they're an obstacle to what you're trying to do. And this is saying that they are a troublesome rank, for example. They're notable enough for you to have to fight them, but ultimately, do they reflect your character's development? Probably not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the reason I've done that. Now, I do appreciate that it may disincentivize people doing things at a troublesome rank, which is a consequence that could happen. But also, I also think that the troublesome rank is actually quite a good catch-all for those things that they're important, but they're not quite as important as something that's perhaps a little bigger picture. Does that sound, that's kind of how I view troublesome things. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I also see it as a way of pacing things. And I know I can remember one notable thing in my first campaign. I had an instance where a character, ironically enough, failed on a make a connection roll with someone that I wanted to create a bond with. And they were kind of tasked with a mission in order to sort of repair that relationship. And for what I was doing, I was just like, I could spend the next like 6 or 7 episodes just dealing with this thing, but that is going to completely kill the pace of the story. So I just made it a troublesome vow to go get this thing and come back, because I'm like, I can do this in, a couple of rolls. We'll just kind of elide that journey and that experience and come back. And I think that in the framework that you've kind of set up, like, would I have made that same choice? Because I do think that kind of salvaging that relationship was important to the character. So in that case, it feels like I probably would have at least had to do a dangerous vow in order to make that work. But I also think that, like, the difference between troublesome and dangerous when it comes to actually filling progress
Hmm.
isn't so insurmountable that I feel like I still could have done that same. I still would have made that same choice just within that new framework.
Yeah.
So I think overall I like it.
Yeah. So the whole it's not a move. It's a thing, right? It goes on to say at boxes 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. So the odd boxes. It says when this box is filled, reflect on the events that led to filling this box and how it affects your character. Then you may advance. So advancement is done exactly as you would do it. So at box 1, you're going to get those 2 XP, which means you could upgrade one of your assets, or you could save it for box 3 and buy a new asset when you have a little more. And that's one part of it. The second part of it says boxes 2, 4, 6, and 8. So the even boxes. It says when this box is filled, reflect on the events that led to filling the box and how it affects your character. Then there's a new move that I've written, which is tentatively titled Reflect on Your Journey. I do not like that name at all, but I couldn't think of anything better. When you reflect on your journey, it says, when you fill the appropriate box on your legacy track, take a moment to mark why this moment is in particular, why this moment in particular is significant to your character and their story. If you're unsure of what this means, answer a question from the Reflections Oracle, which is something that myself and Steve have both written a few entries for. We will come to that. Then there is a trigger on box 10, which says when this box is filled, your character journey is over. Write your epitaph, which is a move that I'd like to see coming back from Ironsworn. I always liked that move. There is kind of like, and I've put it in here. It says, if you wish to continue the story with another character, continue your legacy, which is a move from Starforged. So this is a way of fulfilling that idea that I had of having a more self-contained, finite end to your story. I kind of think this will fill up at the same rate that it normally does, because maybe a little slower actually, because you've got you won't be filling anything on a troublesome, which you do, but there's more triggers. So for this, you get to fill it in when you finish a combat, for example, which doesn't count towards your legacy tracks in Ironsworn as written, but here you would. And also finishing an expedition, fulfilling a vow, forging a bond, or taking decisive action. So those are the 4 triggers. I would probably suggest that we could even design some assets that also had triggers on them to do that as well. But yeah, I think that as in a rough sense, I think that that's actually quite a good way of doing it. It would need to be kind of tested and thought through. How do you feel about that, Steve?
I like it. I think it's interesting. I really do like the idea of adding on ticks for your legacy track with take decisive action, because there are definitely times where it feels like combat is incredibly important for the development of your character. And I think that would also encourage a player to make sure that if they are, entering the fray, that it is for a meaningful reason, and that it's not the more like D&D-esque random encounter of 3 goblins in a forest. Like this has a momentous impact on who your character is going forward.
Yeah,
which I think is cool.
And we did say that reflect on your journey is a move, and it has a reflections oracle that myself and Steve have just kind of tooled around with a few ideas. They're quite different ours, but we'll have a little look at them. So kind of questions that I came up with that you could roll up on this oracle include what would your most trusted connection from your past think of you if they could see you in this moment? How have your assumptions changed about your background vow compared to when you started? Do you feel like a hero or villain in this moment? I quite like that one.
Yeah.
Who have you hurt, perhaps unintentionally, getting to this moment? Have the costs you've paid to get here been worth it? Is very interesting. And then yeah, there's a few more. Steve's come up with a few. I'm just going to switch to that now.
All right. So I came up with, who made you into the person you are today?
Ooh.
How far are you willing to go for your convictions? Why weren't you surprised by the circumstances that led you to your first vow? What about this moment scares you?
Well, I really like that one. I like the
Where
idea
do you
that a lot of what we've come up with are like inward looking moments, inward looking thoughts at triumphant moments.
Yeah.
Which I quite like.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see this ending? How many friends have you lost along the way? And what will be remembered about you?
That one's cool. I've got a very similar one, which was which of your deeds will be remembered, fondly or ill, which I quite liked that one. So, like, these are obviously very rough, but you can kind of see what we're going for. I really enjoyed kind of writing those little prompts, and I think that you could probably come up with quite a lot. And also, what I like about the stuff that we came up with is it's very easy for someone else to look at them and be like, oh, I get it. I don't need to use one of these. I know what kind of question I want to ask.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're questions that people ask in play anyway? They're questions I'm always thinking about, but do you think that having like an official framework for it that is triggered by the rules means that people who perhaps might ignore that aspect of the game kind of forces them into thinking about those things?
I think so. And I think the fact of the matter is, if somebody is interested in ignoring that aspect of the game anyways, if you are telling a story but you're not really interested in kind of deeply exploring a character and their inner motivations and conflicts, that's totally fine, and you can just ignore this. Even if you were using just the one legacy track, like, you could be like, oh, I'm just gonna, I have to write something down to represent like this moment. Okay, well, I'll just write down a little note about what I'm doing, and like, that's fine. But I think this is definitely more directed towards players who want to have that depth in their characters, that struggle, that conflict, that introspection. And we've talked about too, of like kind of condensing this all into one track, and having these different like advancement uh um thresholds, and then these prompts at different thresholds. Like, it is going to make a more narrowly focused story about this character, whereas Ironsworn, as it's written, is still about a character, and you can still have really in-depth character exploration without these things. But you can also spend a whole bunch of time just exploring and filling up your discoveries track and never really worry about the other tracks. So I think this definitely takes the game from like here and narrows the focus in on really, really in-depth characters, which, as you and I are big on that. So of course we're going to design something that, falls into that spectrum.
Yeah. And interestingly, one of the bits of feedback we got when we started talking about this in the last video is we talked about how across 3 games, between 2 games of Steve's and 1 of mine, how little progress we'd made on the bonds track. And that seemed like a really common theme running through a lot of the other people's games, essentially. And it made us kind of wonder, like, is Ironsworn set up for a game that is purely social, that focuses on bonds, or is it just kind of third in the pecking order? behind quests and journeys, you know, like, is it harder to have a game where you're making bonds? And I actually think I've come to the conclusion, having reread the rules as written, that I think Sean knew this, because there is a catch-up mechanic in the develop your relationship move. So if you develop your relationship with someone who is already a bond, you don't mark progress. You get to mark your legacy track directly just by testing them, or calling upon that on that relationship. And there's no other moves like that in the game. Like, you get to mark your legacy track on the result of finishing an expedition, but like, if you really wanted to, you could just keep spamming this move with a bond, and you could fill your bond legacy track up in no time. And I think we kind of talked a little bit before we went on. Like, it feels like, to really push the bond track up, you kind of have to keep your story and game very localized in a very small area, where you're not leaving as much, you're not going on expeditions or doing as wide-ranging quests. And I feel like maybe that's a blind spot a lot of players. I think definitely, we've shown that we maybe like veer towards the other two modes of advancing through the game. But yes, we had someone on the comments of the previous YouTube video saying that they were marking progress every time they developed their relationship. They put a mark on the legacy track, and that's been working for them. That seems a little easy. I wonder whether, like, you could, every time you test your relationship, because that's a big moment. Maybe on a strong hit, you could mark the legacy track on that. There are ways to do it, but like I said, I think Sean's already almost baked that catch-up mechanic into the game in the rules as written.
And just thinking about it too, of like, well, if you are interested in having a story where you are kind of roaming around and having quests and all that stuff, I think one of the things that we often lean into, because it is a solo game, is that your character is solitary and is operating by themselves. But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. And like, this just popped into my head, but you could play a like Battlestar Galactica style game where you are traveling around the universe in a fleet, and like, maybe you go off to fulfill a quest when you arrive in a new system, but you're still always coming back to the home ship where you have these established relationships. And that's just a different setup, right? Like, that's just a different style of game than the one that you and I have both played a decent amount. And maybe there's a whole wide range of people out there that are listening to this and just thinking like, like, you didn't think about doing that. No, apparently not, until just now. So I think there is a way that you could have your cake and eat it too, where you could still have those quests. But I think because oftentimes the way that Starforged and Ironsworn are played, it is a little bit more leaning towards that, I'm a solitary traveler going through space or wandering through the Iron Lands, and every time I go to a different town, maybe I meet someone, maybe I make a connection with them, but then I'm going to leave them behind when I move on to the next port. And interestingly enough, I feel like Sundered Isles has the potential to not be that, because there is more emphasis on having a ship with the crew, and you could definitely have more NPCs who are crew members that you could develop relationships, and still you're sailing around to all of these different ports and you're experiencing all these different things.
Yeah,
So
there's
I think
specifically the cohort asset as well as all the deed, isn't there, that does that?
Yeah. Yep. So it may just be that we're dumb and we need to just have a little mental adjustment in how we set up our games. And this, isn't as much of a problem as we think it is. But I think you are right to note that there is this unique move in the game that does add extra kind of ticks to your legacy track that it doesn't seem like there is any like comparison for any other moves.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was something that we thought was kind of worth talking about, and kind of giving the feedback that we were hearing about like bonds, and yeah, what we thought about that. And like I said, me and Steve have been working on this in parallel, feeding off each other's ideas. Steve had a slightly different take on this. Talk us through it.
Yeah. So I kind of, based on our conversation last time and some of the offline conversations that I had, that we've had, working through a similar idea of that advances on the odd numbers and then kind of prompts on the even numbers. I didn't have any fancy names to all the moves, so I'm behind on that. And I also, didn't put together the adding the post combat marks. I think where the like big difference for me comes is the advancement. So in the one that you set up, it just follows the regular Ironsworn advancement. And I kind of went down an avenue that we had sort of started talking about, which is on those odd numbers, you take an advancement, but that advancement can be you either unlock one of the abilities on an asset, or you can select a new asset. But, and there's a caveat to this, if you choose to add another asset on the subsequent advancement, you have to trade out one of your existing assets. So that really we're kind of capping it at 5 assets. You've got your ship, you've got your 3 starter assets, and then you can add on a 4th asset. But, kind of really trying to narrow that focus again and kind of keep things really, really focused on like, these are the core abilities of my character.
Mm-hmm.
And then, toss in a little envisioning of how your experiences kind of inform your growth and the assets that you choose or the abilities that you unlock on those assets. And then I went with the expanding legacy as my Oracle name. And that you can answer the question, but also try to fold that into your current vow.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you don't have a current active vow, you should swear a new iron vow as a result of your answer to that question.
That is interesting.
And then if you roll that same question twice on the Oracle, of course you can roll again, but you could also like answer that question a second time and try to delve a little bit deeper into it. So cool. that was kind of the path that I took with that. What do you think about that, Matt?
I really like the idea of limiting assets, and I really like the idea of trading out assets as well. I really like the idea that you find new facets to characters, and when characters have what seem like contradictory abilities, it's actually really fun and interesting. But when you expand on that too far, it becomes, less good. So, for example, in the famous media franchise Star Wars, I don't know if you've heard of it. We first meet Lando Calrissian, right? And he is what would be an archetypal rogue, but he is also a leader of Bespin, or wherever he is.
Yeah.
But when we see him in the next movie, in Return of the Jedi, like, he's no longer a leader of Bespin. He is an ace pilot, And we realized that and it makes perfect sense in his character, but what doesn't make sense is for that to keep folding on top of all these other assets of characters. It's like almost a development of it, and he's kind of like a general, I guess, in the rebellion or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, you can have these extra depths to your characters that you can add in, and as they grow, and you know, Han Solo is a great example. If you're also familiar with that character, like as you know, they change and what they care about changes, then essentially their stations change. And if you think about plotting out Han Solo as a character in Ironsworn, their assets would change over time throughout the kind of the 3 movies that we kind of see him in. So yeah, I really like that, and forcing you as a choice, which we'll come back to when we get to my next thing, forcing you to make choices about your assets and keeping them or losing them or changing them, I think is really interesting. And also, like, it's hard to keep them all relevant. Like, you know, when we met Archie Barlow in Starforged, he was a scavenger and explorer, and whether or not it's because I lent more into the narrative side of it and the rules of it as we went on, but like I lent on those assets far like less frequently, you know, towards the end. And if I was honest with myself, he probably could have taken on some other different assets that would have been more reflective of his character. And I think this is a perfect way to have done that in the gameplay.
Think it is also important to note that just because you don't have an asset doesn't mean that you can't have that character attribute or ability. You know, you can be an ace pilot without having the ace pilot asset. You just don't get the mechanical benefits of that.
It's like you can do whatever you want, but the assets are a way of mechanizing you know, those traits of your character or those skills or your companions or whatnot. So one of the other things we talked about before, and the one I made the boldest of claims about, was getting rid of recover moves, which as aforementioned is a poor idea. Now I have decided to try and keep the spirit of that alive without perhaps being so hasty to remove all the recover moves or make all the recover moves one move, which is just recover. So I've been playing around with something called the Ruin track, which maybe because I play too much Trophy or Trophy Dark. There's, you know, I couldn't think of a more original name for this. And I would say right off the bat, this is very clunky. And this of all my ideas needs by far the most refinement. But essentially, it's kind of like the legacy track, but for negative effects. So it says, when you endure harm, endure stress, sacrifice your resources, lower your track as usual, then you mark ruin equal to the reduction, which is a bit of a very mealy mouth way of saying that, like, if you mark 1 harm or 1 stress, it's 1 tick. 2 harm, 2 ticks, 3 harm, whatever. And unfortunately, there's 5 levels of harm. So what I've done is, when it gets to, if you ever mark 5 harm, you actually just fill 2 boxes, is what I've put there. Then it says, if you forsake your vow, face defeat, or are prompted to do so by a move, you also mark ruin equal to the rank. So if you forsake extreme vow, 3 ticks on your ruin box. If you face defeat in a formidable fight, that would be 2 ticks. So we're kind of, you know, talking about all the negative effects you could have. And I've also put a little note here. You could also put mark ruin triggers on finish an expedition, on a miss on that. You could put it on test your relationship, on a miss on that. Also on withstand damage or companion takes a hit. If you really want to put it in, you could put it in most, like, pay the price, right? So there are lots of opportunities to mark this, in addition to your number go up and down on your health and your spirit. Then we have effects like we have on the legacy box with the odd boxes 1, 3, 5, 7 and 9 prompt you to reflect on the events that led you to filling that box and what it means to your character. I've also left in there, it says reflect on your journey. We could have another oracle, which is the negative side of reflect on your journey, or not even have an oracle at all. Then I have individual things that happen on boxes 4, 6, 8 and 10. So box 4, it says, when this box is filled, reflect on the events that led to the filling of this box, then unmark 1 asset upgrade. So of one of the little pips you've filled in, of an ability that one of your assets got, is now gone. One of those comes off. Box 6. When this box is filled, reflect on the events that led to filling this box, and then discard one asset card. Then, box 8. When this box is filled, reflect on the events that led to filling this box, how it affects your character, and then lower one stat by 1.
Whew.
Box 10. Your character is retired. What is your legacy? Write your epitaph, etc., etc. So it's pretty harsh. It is very harsh. But like, is it fair to say a long-running campaign where if at any point you take 5 damage, or you lose your ship that's been yours for years, or a companion dies, or you fail in an epic quest to do something very badly, like, would you change as a character? There is a progression in role-playing games, and I've said it before, and this is why I don't like games that go on and on and on, is because it's not interesting when a character just gets slowly more powerful. Yeah. What if your character got less powerful over time, or had to manage some sort of, deficit on their sheet, some sort of penalty to how they were going on? Like, and then when I started thinking about this, you've then got this competing system of like, am I playing my character to their end by marking their successes, or am I playing their character to their end by marking their failures? And I think they're both really interesting competing little racetracks. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I agree. I like that a lot, and I think that there's a lot of potential with that push-pull feeling to create a lot of tension and a lot of drama as you're watching those ruin boxes tick up at hopefully not an equal rate to your legacy track.
I think as I've written it here, it's way quicker.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think for that reason, I would not attach it to pay the price because I also like, there's not really a, like, roll on this table and also get, add to your legacy track. So like, let's leave because pay the price might result in you ticking on your ruin track if you take harm or something like that. But that aside, I think that it is really interesting. But what I don't see in here is there a mechanic to reduce that track at all? Or is it just it's a race to the finish line?
I thought about a reduction in it, but then that just felt like cheapening the damage done, and like, I wonder whether you could have something that maybe stops you marking it the next time you do it, possibly. Maybe you could have like a battle hardened asset that if you ever lose a fight, says do not mark ruin if you lose a fight, and something like that. But like, it feels a little cheap to say this is a weighty consequence track, essentially, that has permanent effects on your character, and then saying, well, you can just cross the boxes out if you get some space medicine. I was just thinking what you're saying, like how harsh I've made this by putting it on pay the price. Could you imagine playing rules as written, original Ironsworn with that? You'd be dead before you left the village.
Yeah, it's true. Which can almost happen anyways.
Yeah, so, well, yeah, it's hard enough as it is,
but I also, listening to you talk about this made me think about something else that we talked about that we haven't really put any time into, but it was that idea of momentum as a resource. And it could be that this would just work as an asset, but I think it would be interesting for there to be some mechanic where if you burn a certain amount of momentum, or maybe you bank a certain amount of momentum towards an asset, that kind of counteracts your boxes on the ruin track, but it doesn't actually get rid of them.
Yeah, what about like mark ruin as per the rank, or burn momentum to reduce it by however, like 2 boxes to reduce each thing by one tick or something like that. I
Yeah.
wonder if that, because it kind of makes sense to have. You can't use momentum on things like on progress moves, so it kind of almost gives you something to use that on to minimize the broader damage and say it's a short-term loss and not something that's having this huge long-term effect. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I think it's interesting how like we talked about momentum and then all of a sudden we found a little home for it. But yeah, there's so much design space here that is a perfectly valid use for that thing. I think lastly, and this is coming off the Ruin track, you've had some differing ideas, coming from the get rid of suffer moves question that I asked. Talk us through what you're calling, what is it now?
The endurance clock.
The endurance clock.
Yeah. So I was, as you mentioned, kind of thinking of the idea of, instead of having health and spirit as numbers that tick down as you take harm, what if we take the idea of clocks, which is in Starforged, but also is in Blades in the Dark, which we love ever so dearly.
We do.
And use a clock as a way to represent your physical and mental damage. And the way that I've kind of contextualized that is a 6-segment clock. So when you pay the price and suffer a loss to health or spirit, mark a number of segments on the endurance clock equal to that loss. For each segment, make a notation about the injury, mental or physical. If the clock becomes full, roll face death or face desolation, depending on the majority of physical versus mental notations made. I think we're kind of skipping over like impacts. So there might be some room to like wedge in there if it fills up the first time, you get an impact. If it fills up the second time, then you have to go to face death.
Yeah. And this is you're getting rid of health and spirit, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yep. So you're not marking down health or spirit. And this may not work exactly with the way that you have written the Ruin track, but when you recover, roll plus the appropriate stat. On a strong hit, clear 3 segments of the clock. On a match, you can mark legacy. On a weak hit, clear 2 segments. On a miss, clear 1 segment, but also mark ruin.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think those are
so it's a little give and a little take.
Yeah, I'm into that. Because it's we talked about deep cuts, didn't we? And when there's a big thing in deep cuts about tidying up the harm system and how those goes, and they added recovery clocks, and they work not the same as this, but it's a similar concept, isn't it? And I really like the idea that there is now, if you put this on top of a system where there was already health and spirit, it wouldn't work. It would be too cumbersome. But I think this, instead of having 10 things to fill up, essentially having 6 and having to constantly be thinking about how you manage that is really, really interesting. Yeah. And you could also open a lot of doors for assets and things that might kick in when your clock is so filled, or I really like that idea, like kind of a berserker asset or something that does more progress on a strong hit in a fight if you're at 6 on the endurance clock or something. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I really like those ideas. I really hope that everyone else likes these ideas. Please give it to us straight. Like we're not, I don't want to say that hubris on my account. I think hubris is definitely to blame, but a lot of the things I've said before, like I'm not really that interested in game design. I'm not really interested in thinking that my ideas are in any way better than anyone else's. I do like thinking about game designs as I've said before, mold the game to what I prefer. And I think this was a really fun kind of thought experiment to come up with some stuff that might actually have some benefit to other games and other players. I would love to know what people think of this. Please do give us both barrels in the comments if you think, because the thing is, we've talked about this and like we'll keep checking in on this, because there's clearly something there, whether it's a module that plugs into Ironsworn that helps, change it to a game that makes it more in line with my taste as a developer, as someone who plays role-playing games, or whether it's just a fun design experiment that we'll look at and then never think of again. We'll see. But I really enjoy putting these together.
Yeah, I did too. I talked to you a little bit about this before we started recording, in that I kind of struggled with this because I think that as it is, Ironsworn and Starforged are kind of more in line with my gaming sensibilities. And I don't feel like my tastes, I've got 10-ish more years of gaming under my belt than you do.
You do?
So I kind of wonder if like I have already sort of crested over that area where I was like figuring out what my gaming tastes were. And like I've kind of hit a place where I'm like, I'm an old man now. I know what I like. And like I'll still try the newfangled games, but like I'm on record as saying I could play Starforged every day of my life for the rest of my life, and I would be perfectly happy with that.
Yeah.
So I definitely struggled with trying to come up with stuff because I was like, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But also, I do enjoy the kind of theoretical noodling that we're doing here. And so being able to kind of talk through these things with you and then get to hear the feedback from our viewers has been really, really like enjoyable. And, it started to like spark off some ideas. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, 100% it is.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to think about. I kind of hadn't really put that together, that like you've got so much more experience with games than me, and like I'm still figuring out what kind of games I like, and finding what I'm currently into might be completely different to what I'm into if we came back to this subject in kind of five years or so. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Please let us know what you think, and maybe we'll be back next month with part 3 of this, where we've gone to the printers.
We can really just wring out as much out of this as we can.
Back to the well, everyone, once again. But yeah, thanks for coming along with us on this little game design journey. Next month we'll maybe back with something else, possibly. Who knows? Might be more homebrewing. But yes, goodbye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Goodbye.